Welcome, everyone. My name's Steve Villachica. I'm with the Organizational Performance and Workplace Learning Program here at Boise State. This April, I attended the online conference of the International Society for Performance Improvement. I saw Kaylynn's insightful presentation on measuring organizational performance. I've been interested in maturity indexes that measure organizational performance since I was working in undisclosed government agencies and unnamed locations way before I came to Boise State. The Organizational Performance Index that Kaylynn described in her presentation seemed to be something that nonprofit agencies could use to inform their strategic planning. Kaylynn graciously agreed to reprise her presentation for us. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's all yours.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to give a presentation and more so have a conversation with some of your students and some other members of the nonprofit community that may be attending tonight. So my name is Kaylynn Palaio, and I work for an organization called Pact, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the organization to get us started. And I'm a Senior Capacity Development Officer with Pact. So that's one of our technical focus areas. So what I do is I support a portfolio of country offices and projects, and we really focus our efforts on strengthening civil society organizations in the countries where we work so that they're better capable and able to achieve their missions and to deliver services to their communities and their constituents. So hopefully everyone is seeing my screen. So the idea for this evening is to give a brief intro to the organization I represent, talk about why we measure organizational performance, give you a run through of the tool that we use, the Organizational Performance Index, or the OPI, talk about some of the studies that the index has gone through, and then share a case study, and then I'm more than happy to spend a bunch of time talking about questions or receiving comments. So to begin with, some background on the organization I represent, Pact. We are a nonprofit international development organization. We were founded in 1971, so we're celebrating 50 years this year. Headquarters is in Washington, D.C., but we work on the ground in almost 40 countries, working to improve the lives of people who are challenged by poverty and marginalization. And our vision as an organization, put very succinctly, is thriving, resilient communities where those we serve are heard, capable, and vibrant. And we do this by building systemic solutions in partnership with local organizations, businesses, and government. And in our work specifically with local organizations, we seek to strengthen them, as I mentioned, so that they're better able to achieve their missions and deliver services. And we do this through the practice area that I'm a part of that we refer to as capacity development. So what do we mean when we say capacity development? This is a term that many of you may have heard. We use it very commonly in the international development sector. And I think it's helpful to start off with a common understanding of what it is we're talking about, right? So at Pact, we define it as a continuous process that fosters both the ability and the agency of individuals, organizations, systems, and communities to achieve their goals and contribute towards positive social change. And we always like to couple our overview of what is capacity development with the theory of change that underlies our work with local organizations, because it helps to understand why we want to measure organizational performance in the first place and why we first sought to create this index and why we continue to use it now. So our theory of change that underlines our practice area posits that if an organization becomes stronger, so they have stronger policies, skills, procedures, practices, etc., then they will improve their external performance and thus have a greater impact in the communities that they serve. So in other words, capacity development helps organizations grow stronger so that they will have a lasting impact in the communities that they serve. Thus, we aren't helping organizations develop internal systems just so that they have better systems. We're really looking to answer the question, capacity for what? What is the larger purpose? And we're helping organizations to become stronger, develop capacities to make an impact in areas, really important areas such as health, education, the environment. And we realized that if we only measure internal improvements in organizations, that we're not really answering the so what question. So, for example, how can we prove that the changes in internal organizational capacity actually result in a better performing organization, leading to better impact in the communities? So one example to kind of put it in more concrete terms is, how could we know that a newly established monitoring and evaluation system actually helps an organization learn from its experiences and adapt to a changing environment or adapt based on results? So we need a way to link the internal changes, which we understand to be at the sort of output level, to the greater impact. Traditionally, we have linked internal capacity directly to programmatic impact, but there's a gap in that logic. And we've closed that gap by creating a tool that can measure the outcomes of capacity development, or that measures organizational performance. So essentially, by analyzing the change in how an organization interacts with the world around it, as a result of the internal changes, we're able to demonstrate that change in the programmatic impact is, at least in part, the result of organizational improvements. So the basic idea is that by measuring and tracking some key areas in an organization's performance, that over time, you can see how these internal changes result in higher performance. This tool is underpinned by a theoretical framework that was developed by Universalia, which is a management consulting firm, and IDRC, which is the International Development Research Center. Several years ago, they developed this framework, which posits that there were 4 main domains of organizational performance, including effectiveness, efficiency, relevance, and sustainability. So that's the theoretical underpinning. And from that, Pact built upon it and operationalized the 4 domains into subdomains that further clarify what they consist of. And we also recently expanded upon the original framework and have added a 5th domain of resilience that covers an organization's ability to adapt and influence external environment. The OPI as a tool is relatively simple, low cost, not a huge time commitment, and it allows organizations to measure their performance using this standard framework. So next, I'm going to walk you through some more detailed explanations of these different domains and subdomains, and then we'll look at what at the tool itself and what the scores and the results look like as well. So effective organizations, or effectiveness, is the ability of an organization to carry out high quality programs according to its mission and goals. And so underneath effective, effectiveness, we have the subdomains of results and standards. So we believe that effective organizations measure and analyze the longer term results that help position them to best serve their beneficiaries. So they're setting clear programmatic outcomes and they're consistently achieving those outcomes. Effective organizations also are ensuring the quality of their programs and services by abiding by standards, some set of standards. So they're linking their work and outcomes to quality benchmarks in whatever their field is. Efficient organizations, or efficiency, is the ability of an organization to plan and budget for their activities in a consistently successful manner. And this is further described by the subdomains of delivery and reach. Efficient organizations, we believe, have work plans and budgets, and they're able to use these to adequately use resources and deliver their services. This means that an organization has operational and programmatic work plans that they consistently follow. Efficient organizations also use their resources in a way that allows them to plan for and reach their target audiences or their beneficiaries. So they have a clearly defined population that they work with. They're reaching that population effectively, and they might even be planning to grow their programs to reach even more people. Next is relevance, and relevance is the ability of an organization to respond to the real actual needs of its beneficiaries and to stay alert to any change that influences this ability and to be flexible to alter their course of action. Relevant organizations engage their target populations throughout program implementation, again, ensuring that they're meeting the actual needs. So this would imply participatory planning, decision-making, and implementation processes. Relevant organizations also embrace learning as a key driver for change from within. So they're documenting and learning from successes and failures. They have strong monitoring and evaluation practices, and they use the results of that information to influence their work. Next is sustainability. So sustainability, as I'm sure you all would imagine, is the ability of an organization to ensure that its services are supported by a diverse base of local and international resources. So this is funding, but not just funding. It's also people, trust, and other kinds of support. So the first subdomain is resources. So this is really financial sustainability, right? So having resources, ideally from multiple sources, and then social capital. So this is the idea that the connections in their communities that are able to leverage in a positive and strategic way, and also having partnerships in local, national, and international networks that they are able to leverage those partnerships to achieve impact and influence decision makers. Finally, the last and newest domain is resilience. And we understand resiliency, organizational resiliency, to be the ability of an organization to be agile, recognize and respond to challenges and changes within its environment. So relevant organizations can adapt to changes in their environment while at the same time continuing to deliver quality programming. And we also believe that relevant organizations can alter the external environment in which they operate through influence by means of lobbying, advocacy, research, negotiation, etc. So that's a little bit more of an explanation of each of the 5 domains and the subdomains, which are really all of the indicators that make up the index. So what does this actually look like? So this is, hopefully it's not too small on your screen, but this is an example of the tool. So this is one domain, the effectiveness domain. And essentially for each domain and subdomain, there are 4 levels. And each level is accompanied by a description of that level and evidence. And the evidence is a listing of documents that essentially that an organization could provide to substantiate the fact that they would place themselves at a level 3, for example. So this is helpful because unlike other capacity assessments, like organizational capacity assessments, which a lot of times are not based on evidence, this is an evidence-based index. And it's important to note that the quality of the evidence is as important as having it. So that's something that we always keep in mind when we're working with partner organizations. And the score, what the actual results look like. So the score consists of 10 numbers. So there's one score per subdomain, and each it's on a scale of 1 to 4. And those are all averaged to determine the overall index score. Organizations, when they're implementing the OPI, they come to a consensus on a score for each of the subdomains. And then we go through a process of evidence review and substantiating the scores. And we typically show the results in the spider graph. The spider graph is from the original 4 domain OPI. So you'll notice it's missing 2, but it serves to show you how we're also able to compare results over time. We oftentimes have multi-year partnerships with NGOs and community-based organizations in other countries, so we can track how they are progressing over time. And another neat thing that we use and that Pact created is called the Capacity Solutions Platform, or the CSP, which is a web-based platform that administers, measures, analyzes, and reports on all things related to capacity development. So that includes automated reports of OPI results, as well as reports from some of our other tools, including capacity assessments and network analysis. And it's also neat because it allows local organizations to enter data directly, view the results online, and they can share them through automated reports. And in terms of the practicalities of what it looks like to actually implement the OPI and use the tool, this is very general guidance, but set aside a couple of hours. It also depends on the level of maturity of the organization you're working with. It would take longer if you need to explain the domains in more depth and really have more conversation and dialogue. But 2 hours or a couple of hours, and you want to make sure that you have a couple of key representatives from the organization present in the conversation and the scoring process. You're going to want somebody from leadership, someone from the financial side of things, someone from the programmatic side of things, probably somebody who's in charge of monitoring and evaluation, those kinds of key actors within an organization. And then you really go through each of the domains and you have a facilitated discussion to determine where an organization lies on the scale, and discuss what evidence is available and can be provided. Sometimes we ask organizations to compile evidence before we have the facilitated discussion. Other times it's provided afterwards, and then there's a period of sort of dialogue to determine, is the evidence that was provided matching the score that the organization has selected. And so that goes into the verification process, where we verify the evidence and we provide feedback, and we work to come to a consensus and agreement of where the organization score is in each of the domains. It's important to note that the OPI has gone through both, that it's a rigorous measurement tool, and it's gone through both reliability and validity studies. And I believe in the notice for this webinar, there was a link to a journal article that goes into much more depth in terms of these studies. But at a high level, the reliability study, it tries to establish whether repeat measurements will generate the same results. So the hypothesis was, if two different people use the tool with the same organization, they should assign a similar score. And so based on some statistical analyses, it was found to be a reliable tool. Then there is the validity study, which checks whether the tool is measuring what we intend to measure. So we questioned experts from various organizations on whether or not the tool is a valid measure of organizational performance. And the experts agreed that it was in fact a valid measurement. So now to put it hopefully into a bit more tangible terms with a brief case study, there was a project, it's closed now, but there was a project that our Pact was implementing in Indonesia that is called Linkages. It is funded by the US Agency for International Development and PEPFAR, which is the US President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, long acronyms. But it was a project for the provision of HIV and AIDS services to key populations in the country. And as part of the program, Pact was tasked with strengthening the capacity of several local organizations in Jakarta who were providing either direct services or other social services to these key populations. And so we were able to use the results of the OPI to create differentiated approaches and target our support activities to different groups within this cohort of organizations. So within the cohort, at one point we sort of, in our work planning purposes, because we always have limited amount of time and limited budget, we divided the organizations into two groups. So we were able to use a differentiated approach between the higher performing and the lower performing organizations. So group one were organizations that scored higher than a 2.5 on the OPI, and group two were organizations with a score lower than 2.5. So, and then within that division, we looked closer at the results, and within group one, in general, it was recommended, since they were stronger organizations, for less direct support, and that some of them could even potentially serve as mentors to other organizations to have some peer-to-peer learning. And then as we dove deeper into the results, the OPI results, you can see here we focused on sustainability and relevance domains because they were the least improved. And then within those, you can see the social capital and target population, the first and the last on the bar graph, did not change year over year. This is data between 2017 and 2016. So it remains stagnant. So those were two areas for us to dig in deeper to understand, why that is the case and what assistance could we provide to help in those areas. The second group, which were the quote lower performing organizations, they required more intensive support. So we were able to, intentionally set aside more time and resources for additional trainings and technical assistance to this subgroup. And within all of the domains, this is showing the relevance subdomain, which was the least improved. And so then we were able to create a strategy to address weaknesses related to the learning and target population domains, because they were both, between the learning and target population domains. So that's a really quick overview of the index, what it means, how we develop, why we developed it, how we are able to use the results. I am more than happy to answer any questions you have. I also realized I did not address Sarah's suggestion that I tell you more about myself. So if anyone has any questions about my background, I'm happy to dive deeper into that as well.
Kaylynn, coming from, well done, nicely done. Coming from an academician's or higher education setting, I'm curious as to what your academic background is. And
Sure, yeah. So I got my undergraduate degree. I had a dual concentration in political science and Spanish. And then I knew that I wanted to work internationally. So I went back because unfortunately, or fortunately, in this sector, you pretty much need a master's degree. So I went back, studied at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. for a master's in international development studies with a concentration in gender and capacity development. And yeah, from there, I went to work, I worked abroad for a couple of years in Latin America. And then ever since I've been back in the States, I've been working with Pact.
thank you.
And could you describe some of the interventions that organizations have used to improve their Pact score, their Pact scores?
Sure, yeah. So it really depends on, and I know that's kind of a lack of answer, but it depends on the organization and what domain or what score we're talking about. So if we're talking about sustainability, for example, and an organization is really struggling to be financially sustainable, an intervention could be, first seeing if they have a strategic plan. And if they don't have a strategic plan, that might be the first step to then help them think through where they want to focus their energies and for what they would be looking for funding. Or it could be a training course in resource mobilization, fundraising, social entrepreneurship, other alternative means of generating resources. Those are the kinds of things. So typically it comes in different forms. It could be a training program. It could be more of like technical assistance, like linking an organization to an expert, a consultant, or a staff member who's an expert in a certain area. Sometimes we're able to do mentorship, which is more of like an accompaniment model of sort of walking hand in hand with an organization as they learn a new process or a new skill. And exchanges also is something that we used to do back in the day when people could travel, although virtual exchanges are certainly a thing nowadays.
Could you go back to your the slide that had the theory of change that was early in your presentation? This was really cool for me because it says that if you're an organization and you're trying to affect a change in the community, you have to have internal policy skills, procedures, and practices. And those allow you to improve external performance, and that allows you to have impact. From what I hear from some of our nonprofit partners, this can be a hard place to be because granting agencies are always focused on impact, impact, impact. And so the organizations tend to focus on impact and their mission. And this can happen at times at the expense of their internal infrastructure. Does Pact help organizations link the importance of their internal infrastructure and the need to potentially improve it to measures of external performance and impact?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think, there's very few, well, I don't know the domestic nonprofit sector very well, but I understand that, getting funding for this kind of internal strengthening, internal organizational development, it's not very common. Like you said, the funders want to focus on the impact and funding the impact. I would say that Pact, we do. I mean, we have sort of a niche in that we're able to work in that area, and one of our main funders, which is the U.S. Agency for International Development, recognizes the value and the importance of capacity development and of strengthening, of not just funding an organization to achieve impact, but to ensure that that impact is sustainable. That organization itself needs to be sustainable and needs to have strong internal processes and policies. But more directly to your point, I think that link between performance and impact is one that we're still kind of working on a little bit. I mean, you can, for example, in some of our programs, you could track, increases in organizational performance over time with some of the measures of impact. So, like an example could be in an HIV/AIDS service provision program, it could be tracking, the number of clients that are put on treatment or are retained in treatment. And you could, potentially track that alongside the organization's changing performance. But I think, essentially the existence of programs and projects, and we have many that are seeking a larger impact, but they have a component that is focused on institutional strengthening. I think that's speaking volumes in terms of how the funder understands and puts importance on these processes, which a lot of the times it can be overlooked.
How collaborative are your projects, and what are your major challenges in creating local ownership?
That's a really great question. So I feel like I could give you the proper answer, and I could also give you the real answer to that question. The proper answer is, we focus on local ownership, and most of our programs are actually implemented through local partners. So it's not very common that we would have a program where we hire staff who implement the activities. We're oftentimes kind of a conduit for the money to go to local organizations. We strive to engage communities throughout the project design and implementation process. We actually have, I'm part of a team, it's the capacity development and innovation team. And my innovation colleagues are really well versed in human-centered design methodologies, which essentially, and we've used these in not all, but a lot of our programs to hear directly from the communities, what interventions do they want, do they need? And right now, we actually just recently launched a new organizational strategy in which guiding star. We first called it our North Star, but we quickly realized that the North Star is only visible to half of the world. So our guiding star is the concept of engaged communities and what that actually means, and kind of truth testing a lot of our programs to see to what extent are we actually engaging communities and to what extent are we not. The real answer is, and just a reality of the international development sector, and I'm sure is also a reality of the US domestic nonprofit sector, that the way that it works is that, the way that it works in terms of when you're getting money from the US federal government, this isn't the case with, necessarily with foundations or other private sector companies that we work with, but with the US government, they come out with a call for proposal. They've already done some design and some thinking. They probably have done some coordination or some consultations with communities or with representatives of communities, and then it's often a team of combination between DC staff and country staff who design the programs. So there's always improvement. We could always do better, but a lot of the times the structure and the system of how it's set up just kind of works against local ownership. However, I will say a really neat example that kind of goes against what I just said is we're getting ready for a proposal in Ethiopia, and part of our preparation is that we're carrying out a human-centered design activity with communities so that we actually are responding directly to what they think should happen. And it's a health system strengthening program, and the U.S. government has been funding health system strengthening in Ethiopia for decades. So we're kind of trying to approach it from the perspective of how can we do this differently, because clearly something hasn't been working, and that something might be out of our realm of control. It probably has a lot to do with the political economy context in the country. But I think that the fact that we're putting some of our our organizational money behind this kind of activity in preparation for designing a project is pretty neat.
Could you go back to the slide where you have that sample from the OPI and its
Sure.
questions? I wanted to make sure I could understand this. So each domain has a suite of questions or a suite of measures.
Mm-hmm.
And those measures are arranged in levels. And so the higher levels correspond to a more mature organization with more capacity than the lower levels.
Correct.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And for each one of these domains, there's a separate suite of questions. And the idea is that people, representatives from the organization get together and they go through and they look at each one of these domains and indicators, and they look at placing themselves on a level, and then they look at specifying and then providing evidence in support of whatever level they say they're at. Do I have that right?
Yes, exactly. And so because this is sort of a standard measurement, typically in a lot of our approaches and tools, we try to be super flexible and contextualize things. But since this is a standard measurement, the measures don't change. But the one thing that we are able to contextualize is the evidence. So we are able to, depending on the project or the country or the partner, accept slightly different evidence. But yeah, what your summary is accurate.
And is there a way, or how does an organization get access to this kind of tool so they can begin this analysis and begin working with all y'all?
Mm-hmm. So the tool itself, we have a handbook that includes the actual tool, as well as, you know, background information on implementation, that's publicly available on our website. But also, if an organization was interested in, you know, working directly with Pact, I mean, we would be more than happy to have a conversation to see what that would look like. But the information is out there, and I think it's also linked to this webinar as well.
Oh, and then the first time I saw a maturity index was years ago, and it was the Carnegie Mellon Maturity Index, which high-end manufacturing folks use. And so it was very, very process-centric. And I was, if you think about Department of Defense contractors and the resources they can bring to bear in creating things for the government, they tend to be very high on that maturity index. And at the time, I was working with a relatively small woman-owned consulting firm. And when we were looking over the index, one of the things we realized is that we could look at the index and we could peg ourselves at different levels. And in some places, we could clearly see a need that, you know, we're at a level 2 here, we could be better and maybe be a level 3 or a level 4 here. But one of the other things we realized is that as a small, you know, woman-owned consulting firm, we would never be a significant competitor to a DoD contractor. And where a DoD contractor might expect over time to have everything pegged at a level 4 in order to be competitive. As a small consulting firm, that didn't seem appropriate for us. Does that kind of logic apply to the OPI in terms of the range of organizations you work with, you know, ranging from government organizations to the equivalent of small local nonprofits?
There certainly is a range. I would say, so we only use the OPI with like community-based organizations, nonprofits. We have a sister tool that's the government performance index,
Okay.
GPI. But yeah, so with the OPI, we definitely see a range, you know, from national level NGOs that are, you know, they're probably scoring 3s and 4s to small, nascent, even like unregistered community-based organizations. And so I would say, I think one thing is also to consider, you know, whether the goal is necessarily in every case to be a level 4, right? I mean, it's the ideal, but I think for some organizations, you know, the lower levels, it's not that they don't want to get to the higher levels, but yeah, there's definitely a range for sure. And we even found it particularly challenging, but still largely applicable to organizations that we have a program that works in the Amazon basin in South America, and we work with indigenous peoples organizations. So it was really interesting in that context, just understanding how this entire index is based upon Western cultural norms and ideals, and to a certain extent, those indigenous organizations need to meet these Western standards and ideals if they're going to be able to obtain government funding, international funding, those kinds of things. So there's an interesting balance between, you know, recognizing where these standards come from and their cultural like spin, and then also educating our local partners that, you know, you can meet some of these Western standards while still maintaining your cultural, by still preserving your culture, by still, you know, not becoming like one organization said, you know, like, we don't want to become a city organization. Like, we want to maintain, you know, we want to stay who we are. So I thought that that's an interesting dynamic that we came across recently.
Rob, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. So Kaylynn, when you go from, you know, Steve was talking about kind of different types of sizes of organizations, et cetera. I was kind of also wondering about different industries, I guess, or different categories of organizations. And as you come in, or as one uses the OPI, the particular indicators are different from one organization to the next, are they not? Or are those all standardized? Effectiveness is results and standards always, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for the OPI, the measures are standard across sectors and across sizes of organizations. So we use the OPI, for example, we would use it with, or we have used it with, you know, organizations in Latin America that provide social services to orphans. And we also use it for with, you know, Indigenous peoples organizations who are more into advocacy and like human rights issues. So we use it across the board. What you're kind of alluding to is perhaps more closely aligned with another tool that we use, which is the ITOCA, the Integrated Technical and Organizational Capacity Assessment. That differs in the fact that it's measuring internal capacities and it's a self-assessment. So it's not evidence-based and it's not standard, but it's great in the fact that it can be fully customized to a particular sector or to a particular organization or a particular country for that matter. So we do definitely value that and understand the differences and creating a tool that speaks to those differences. I will say that with this, the OPI, most of these domains, since it's at such a high level, you don't really see it being not applicable. And where it is, like for standards, for example, it just refers broadly to this idea of standards, right? And so like standards for an organization that's providing services to, you know, orphan children will be different than the standards that an organization that's working on human rights will be. But so that's how you can customize it in terms of the evidence. So the evidence of meeting that standard would be different for different organizations, if that makes any sense.
So primarily, most of it stays the same from one type of organization to the next, although the evidence may need to be tweaked, I guess, from one situation to the next. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Because I love how broadly it's worded. That makes it easy, quite easy to be able to apply to an organization, to pretty much any organization. I was just wondering how much industry specific or type specific information there is that needs to be rewritten or redone. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I encourage other people to add questions to the chat if they wish. If not, I'll keep asking questions, and Rob and I and Sarah can keep asking questions. One thing I was wondering is if organizations use the OPI as an input for their own strategic planning, or if their strategic plan is something that informs the OPI, or maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, my experience has been that the OPI can be an input into strategic planning. So when the organization is looking internally at where its strengths or gaps are, it can be an important input. I was just recently starting a strategic planning process with a regional association of midwives in the Caribbean, and we use the results of the OPI as well as the results of the other tool that I noted, the ITOCA, as we were starting, to look critically at their vision for the future, and does it align with their current vision and their mission, and taking stock of where they are at present. So yeah, I think it does help to inform strategic planning. And Pact actually, as an organization, we applied the OPI to ourselves this year. And as we were going through a strategic planning process, so we kind of set a baseline for ourselves, and we'll follow up and reassess ourselves to see how we're progressing. So we also use the tool on ourselves.
And I think I'm imagining, as people use the tool, maybe the discussion starts centering around, given this domain, what level are we, and what kind of evidence do we have? What level might be appropriate? Is this a place where we want to stay or not? And then if not, what other level might be more appropriate? Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's pretty much how the conversations go in terms of the actual application of the tool. I'm seeing, I actually have the chat here. The internal capacity assessment tool, was that available? Yes, it is also available on our website. I think on our website it's just called the Organizational Capacity Assessment, or the OCA. We also have the ITOCA, which is what we use more commonly, which integrates organizational capacity areas with technical capacity areas. So that, Rob, to your point, that's where the sort of like industry specific comes into play, where we would have technical capacity areas. So for health programs, there would be like, health focused technical capacity areas on like maternal health, or whatever the health focus area would be.
And could an organization contact Pact with the idea of starting a conversation that says, it's clear you have a number of different tools. We think we have these kinds of needs. What tools or combinations might be most helpful for us?
Yes, absolutely. So we'd be happy to have that conversation with organizations and see, if they have if they have someone internally who could help facilitate these, or if they want to seek out someone professionally to help them talk through what makes the most sense.
And
Oh, excuse me, Steve.
yes, go ahead.
Kaylynn, I'm really interested in your comment about this is a very Western, this is language that fits the American culture or Western culture, but not, you know, the Amazon groups. I mean, how can we use, I mean, how does this play into our need to become more international in our thinking or more diverse in our thinking about what performance healthy organizations look like across cultures?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I should have expected nothing less from professors, right? But you know, I think the onus is on us. I think it's on us to be aware of our biases and to be aware of where the theory and the underlying assumptions come from. I think that's the first step, honestly. And I think there needs to be a component of in the analysis that addresses it. So in the example I was giving in the Amazon, we were looking at the results across the board. We saw some trends. Like one of the trends, for example, was on the learning subdomain, where most organizations scored pretty low. And you know, on further probing, we kind of came to the general understanding that their concept of learning is different than ours, of ours being you know, much more sort of based on results, whereas theirs is much more based on reflection. And also I think results was another one of the areas where a lot of the times the organizations are focused a little bit more on the process and not as much on the results, so not as much as on tracking results. But I mean, I think you pose a really important point in that, yeah, I mean, I think as like organizational development practitioners and studiers, we yeah, I think that's something that we all grapple with. I don't really have a great answer to your question, but it's a good one, and I think that's one we should be asking ourselves more often.
Well, it comes out of experience in public health as well, where we haven't been stellar in that recognition of community culture and the importance of tailoring what tools we might bring to community. So I think it's an ongoing challenge that I think we all have to just kind of take on as a we must do better. Yeah,
absolutely.
We're in the boat.
Great question.
Well, we've come to the end of our time together. So I'd like to thank you, Kaylynn, for being so generous and sharing your expertise with us. We have recorded this session so that we can share it with our colleagues who couldn't join us tonight. And thank you and Pact for what you do for organizations throughout the world.
You are most welcome. It was my pleasure to share a little bit about what we do and to engage with you all. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you all. We're coming to the end of our time. So thank you all. Goodbye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye now. Thanks.